Padre Pio often encountered souls whose earthly lives hid deep spiritual wounds, but few struck him as profoundly as the soul of a wealthy man who had spent his entire life chasing success. In the world's eyes, this man was everything admirable, prosperous, influential, respected, and seemingly blessed with an abundance that others could only dream of. People saw his luxurious clothes, his fine home, the powerful circles he moved in, and assumed he lived a life touched by God's favor. What they could not see, what only a saint with spiritual vision could see, was the slow hollowing of his heart. This man had not always been distant from God. In his youth, he prayed, he showed kindness, and he felt gratitude for the simple things. But as wealth began to flow toward him, something subtle shifted. Success became intoxicating. Recognition became addictive. Slowly, quietly, greed slipped into his heart like a shadow that first feels harmless, then becomes impossible to remove. The more he gained, the more he wanted. Every achievement only sharpened his hunger for more. Eventually, faith became a background ornament, something he remembered only during celebrations or public events. He stopped praying, for prayer seemed unnecessary. He no longer noticed the poor who approached him. He saw only burdens. Friends became opportunities, and people became investments. His entire world narrowed to numbers, accounts, possessions, and status. By the time Padre Pio saw his soul in a mystical vision, the man's earthly reputation still shone brightly, but spiritually he was empty like a grand mansion with all its lights on, yet not a single living soul within. It was the tragedy of a man who gained everything the world could give and lost everything heaven considered precious. When Padre Pio was granted a vision of the wealthy man's soul, he described it not with anger, but with immense sorrow. The soul did not appear wicked in the way some sinners do. There were no signs of hatred, cruelty, or malice. Instead, there were chains. Heavy, metallic, suffocating chains that wrapped around the soul's arms, chest, and even its throat. These chains, Padre Pio understood, were forged not by violence or vice, but by attachment, an attachment so strong that even death could not break it. In his vision, the soul kept reaching for something invisible. Its hands stretched outward, trembling, as if grasping for objects it once owned. Padre Pio explained that these were the remnants of his obsession: money, investments, property, success, admiration. Even after dying, the man's soul still believed it needed those things, still felt incomplete without them. Heaven could not fill a heart that clung so tightly to earth. The most tragic part was the soul's confusion. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't rebellious. It was simply lost, unable to understand why everything it lived for suddenly held no value. The rich man had built his identity on wealth. Without it, he felt like nothing. This emptiness created a deep spiritual darkness around him, a fog so thick that the light of God could barely reach him. Padre Pio said the man had not been evil, but he had lived as if God were an optional accessory rather than the center of his life. Greed had not been his intention, but it had become his master. And now, in the spiritual realm, that invisible master revealed its true form: chains heavier than any metal on earth. It was a warning, Padre Pio said, for anyone who lets possessions possess their soul. Padre Pio explained that the wealthy man's final moments on earth were the key to understanding the state of his soul. For most people, death brings a sudden and painful clarity, a moment when the illusions of life fall away and one finally sees what truly mattered. But for this man, the opposite happened. As his life slipped away, he clung even tighter to the world he was leaving behind. In those last seconds, instead of reaching for God, he reached for the things he thought he still needed: security, possessions, status, control. His last thoughts were not of forgiveness, family, or eternity, but of fear of losing everything he had spent his life accumulating. Padre Pio described this as one of the greatest spiritual tragedies, when a person's treasure is buried so deeply in earth that their soul cannot rise toward heaven. The man was surrounded by loved ones as he died, yet spiritually he felt alone. His heart had not been trained to trust anything beyond himself. He had lived with the illusion that wealth could protect him from suffering, from uncertainty, even from death itself. But in the end, death exposed the truth. None of it could follow him. Padre Pio said the man experienced a painful inner shock. He realized in that instant that he had spent his life preparing for everything except the only moment that was guaranteed, his meeting with God, and because he had ignored this reality, his soul entered the spiritual realm confused, unsteady, and unprepared. This was not a punishment but a consequence. A soul forms habits just like the body does, and his habit had been to love what was temporary while neglecting what was eternal. In his final breath, the man discovered that the things he worshipped could not save him. Padre Pio said that when the man's soul entered the realm of purification, it did not face fire as many imagine, it faced truth. And for a soul that had built its identity around wealth, truth was far more painful than any flame. The purification began with a simple but overwhelming realization: everything he trusted was gone. The man had spent decades believing that money could solve every problem, soften every blow, and secure every future. But now, in the spiritual world, that illusion collapsed instantly. He stood before the light of God, and for the first time, the man saw the true shape of his own life. Not the houses, titles, or bank accounts, but the missed opportunities, the neglected spiritual duties, the moments of generosity avoided because they offered no personal gain. This realization did not condemn him. It humbled him. And humiliation, Padre Pio said, is the beginning of purification. The soul felt a deep ache not because God rejected him, but because he finally saw how many times he had rejected God's invitations. He saw moments when grace had whispered to him, urging him to pray, to forgive, to give freely, to love more. Moments he brushed aside because he was too busy building a kingdom that now meant nothing. In purgatory, he did not suffer because God forced him to. He suffered because his heart now longed for the God he had ignored. The chains of greed began to loosen not through punishment, but through longing. Every second of purification expanded his desire for heaven and diminished his attachment to earth. Padre Pio said this transformation was slow but beautiful. A heart once hardened by wealth was now learning how to love freely, without the weight of possession. This was the mercy of God at work, painful, yes, but healing. Padre Pio explained that the man's soul, once purified, carried a message that echoed far beyond his own life. He learned too late that wealth is not evil, but worshiping it is. Money can build hospitals, feed the hungry, and support families, but only if the heart behind it is free. His heart had never been free. It had been chained to numbers, accounts, and possessions that vanished the moment he died. The soul wanted to tell the living that the greatest tragedy is not having wealth, it is allowing wealth to become a substitute for God. In purgatory, he finally understood that every act of generosity he postponed, every kindness he withheld, every moment he chose comfort over compassion, those were the real losses, not the money he feared losing. Padre Pio said this soul became a silent reminder that earthly riches are temporary, but spiritual wealth follows us into eternity. The soul wished people knew that true treasure is formed through humility, mercy, prayer, and love. He realized that the safest investment is in the things that cannot be taken away: faith, virtue, and charity. In the end, his greatest regret was not how he earned his money, but how little he used it for good. Yet his purification also showed the boundless mercy of God. Even a heart consumed by greed can be healed if it finally desires truth. This was the lesson the soul left behind: love more, give more, cling less, for nothing we own on earth belongs to us forever.